General Yi, Wang, Wayne, Rod, thanks so much for having me here today. To our distinguished guests that are here, particularly those who served during World War II, thank you for everything you've meant to our nation. Now, recognizing that I'm the last thing before we eat, I was going to keep it brief, but seeing as I'm at the podium, I'll just go as long as I want to. I'm just kidding. What an honor to be here today and spend time with the people who I most revere, the men and women who have served their nation and answered the call of duty, raised their right hand and said, "Send me." We can't thank you enough. And so I'll start with that on behalf of the president, it's that notion, that thought, that binding sentiment that keeps our union strong, that keeps our nation vibrant and always ready to serve not only humanity but our fellow citizens and people throughout the world. You know, when you read the headlines today, you get a sense of a little bit of cynicism. Some of that is driven by the enormous amounts of isms that are barraging us in the media every single day. It's almost difficult to overcome. In fact, there's a trace which is moving from just a trace to something a little bit more frightening, which is a sense of not only xenophobic behavior, but an anti-immigrant sentiment. It leaves me a little bit empty sometimes when I hear that. And it makes me think back to the days when I grew up in Minnesota. There weren't too many Indian Americans around growing up in Minnesota. But I'll tell you what, I listened to my mother every day, and she would tell me that if I did my full duty, the rest would certainly take care of itself. And so that's what I did. I felt my duty was to go to the Air Force Academy, serve my nation, and complete a career in the United States Air Force. But let me go back to that empty feeling a little bit, because that's what I believe will take us into the next decade of our nation with fantastic fervor, excitement, and optimism. When I think of an anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States, a xenophobic sentiment, I do feel a little bit empty. But then I think back. I think back to World War II, and I think back to the 442nd and the Nisei warriors, and I think about what their experiences were. In fact, I think about the experiences of the Japanese American community in America, interned. And then I put myself in that seat, a seat that I couldn't fathom, and said, an individual amongst that much bigotry and hate thought and had the hope and faith to raise their right hand and say, "Send me in the name of our nation's principles." When I think of that sacrifice, when I think of what that meant to our nation, I'm overwhelmed with hope. Hope that even in today's world, where we get an inkling of some of that xenophobic sentiment, that we can push through some of that. But it's not easy. And we know Who needs to tell the story? Everybody in this room. And we ought to continue to tell that story. And that's why I revere the men and women in this room for what you do and what you stand for. Because Java is that voice. And I'd say to the next level we must go. And that's joining up with our Philippine community, which we do regularly, the Indian American community. All of our communities together can be strong. In fact, that's what it's going to take to ensure that our ideals as Americans, the concept of e pluribus unum, remain strong in our nation. And that's what gives me so much hope. And our president shares this sentiment. In fact, I believe, as he does, that you can have all the bombs, precision weapons in the world, but they cannot replace the importance of having strong leadership. In fact, it was Gandhi that said those same words when he built and strengthened his democracy. So I say to you that moving into the future, taking our nation into the future, will take a lot of hard work. But we have to remember that we're strongest. Our military is strongest when we have all the world's cultures. Black, white, LGBT, women, all of our communities standing shoulder to shoulder in a formation, visibly united against intolerance, bigotry, and hate. That sentiment presents a very difficult problem for our enemies. Because when that is visible, it's a precision weapon that is hard to circumvent. And I'll say to you that that lives today through the Nisei warriors, through the Tuskegee Airmen, and through all of our communities who fought for the ideals that have made our country strong. And so I'll finish by saying this. Our forefathers felt that those ideals were strong enough to overcome the forces of tyranny, to deliver our nation and build a stronger union. We should too. So on behalf of the President, on behalf of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, I look forward to spending this afternoon with you, breaking bread, and spending some time with people who I most revere, the people who I've worn the uniform with and served with. Thank you.
Yeah.